Chosen one, have you ever felt that your life could be different? That something greater is trying to reveal itself, but there is always an obstacle in the way? You are not alone. 3 angels tried to warn you, but before you could understand the truth, the shadows arrived first. Something unseen has been trying to steer you away from your true purpose. And now, you need to know what is really happening before it is too late. This message did not reach you by chance. There is an invisible war taking place, and your soul is the battlefield. What I am about to reveal may change your perception of everything. There are signs you have received, strange moments you did not know how to interpret, intuitions you ignored. But what if I told you that each of them was an attempt to warn you? The angels tried to open your eyes, but something or someone got there first and sealed your vision. And now, you need to discover who these forces are and, more importantly, how to escape this hidden influence. If you have ever felt trapped in a never-ending cycle, know that this is no coincidence. But before we continue, I have a special request for you. If you feel that this message is speaking directly to your soul, write in the comments, "I am ready to declare to the universe that you are prepared to awaken." Leave a like and subscribe to the channel right now, because the truth that will be revealed may change everything. Turn on notifications to make sure you don't miss any important warnings. Now, prepare yourself, because what comes next may be the missing piece for you to understand your own journey. Reality does not impose itself abruptly. It takes shape in the shadows, between fragments of memories that were never fully understood. You did not notice when the deviation began. It was not a single choice, not a single event. It was a sequence of small concessions, an invisible line that was shifted millimeters at a time. At first, it seemed like an ordinary path, but now, looking back, something does not fit. Time has passed, and what once seemed within reach has become too distant to remember. The silence that has settled in your mind is not natural. It was woven with patience, structured in a way that did not seem like a blockade, but rather an evolution. You were not forcibly prevented from seeing the truth. You were conditioned to believe that it never existed. The voices that came first did not need to erase what was revealed. It was enough to add a new layer over the old one, making it irrelevant, replacing the real with the acceptable, the true with the convenient. And so, what was once a sharp perception became nothing more than a distant intuition, suffocated by noise. The 3 warnings happened. They were not dreams, nor mere coincidences. They were direct attempts at intervention, moments when the truth tried to infiltrate before control was established. But these attempts were not successful. The illusion had already begun to take root. The first warning came subtly, like a shift in the perception of reality. The second came as an unexpected event, a shock that should have shattered the imposed structure. The third, that was the most powerful. But it did not get through. The shadows arrived first and sealed the last breach. That is why now, even as you read these words, something inside you resists. There is a weight, a hesitation, a shadow trying to convince you that none of this matters. This is not a coincidence. It is part of the defense mechanism implanted before your consciousness could expand. If it were a simple illusion, merely seeing it would be enough to dissolve it. But this structure was designed to be self-sufficient, to feed on doubt itself, to survive even when discovered. This is the real reason why so many awaken too late. Those who arrived first never wanted your destruction. They did not need it. The goal was always more subtle, to convince you that your search was pointless. For those who control the backstage, the danger does not lie in those who question, but in those who persist even without answers. That is why distractions are implanted before questions can even arise. Time speeds up. Obligations pile up. The mind sinks into trivialities. Silence establishes itself as a comfortable noise. And so, the prison becomes a choice rather than an imposition. The most ingenious aspect of this structure is that it does not deny the existence of truth. On the contrary, it presents it in a distorted, fragmented, incomplete way. Every piece of the puzzle was given separately, but with essential parts removed. You were never prevented from seeing. You were led to look in the wrong place. And what happens to those who look in the wrong place for too long? They stop searching. They stop questioning. And, in the end, they become the guardians of their own prison. Now that the pieces are beginning to realign, the internal resistance intensifies. Something inside you still hesitates, trying to maintain the balance of the illusion. But there is no more stability. There is no more control. The question that once seemed irrelevant now echoes with a force that can no longer be ignored. If you were never prevented from seeing, then what was it that you really lost? The first warning did not come as a scream. There was no explicit revelation, no clear vision of what was behind the veil. It was a shift in reality, a moment when the simulation trembled, where the structure that kept you blind showed its first crack. Something that lasted only fractions of a second, but carried the weight of a truth that could not be ignored. But it was. The silence that followed was so absolute that it made it seem as though nothing had happened. But it did. A glitch in time. A déjà vu too strange to be a coincidence. An instant where the world seemed to waver. Where a memory surfaced without explanation. Where a connection was formed without being sought. It was an error in the system. A momentary opening that allowed something to slip through. The first warning always comes subtly because it cannot be forced. It must find a receptive mind, a consciousness that, for a moment, is vulnerable to the real. But as soon as it happens, the correction follows. The system adjusts. The distraction takes hold. And the chosen one returns to the state of dormancy without even realizing that something tried to wake them up. The first warning may have come through a dream. Not an ordinary dream, but one that carried a presence, an intensity that set it apart from all the others. An image that remained engraved. A sensation that could not be explained. Something that felt more real than waking life itself. But upon awakening, the force of that dream began to dissolve. The world around you took care of covering any trace of what was seen. Routine took its place. Urgencies occupied the mind. And so, the message was forgotten before it could be understood. For some, the first warning came in the form of an unexpected synchronicity, an event that made no sense within common logic but, for a moment, carried the feeling that there was something greater behind it. Words spoken at the exact moment, an improbable connection between distant events, a meeting that seemed beyond the control of chance. But rationalization followed immediately. Coincidence, chance, nothing significant. The system works like this. It does not deny the truth. It simply teaches you to dismiss it. And for those who were not awakened by the dream or the synchronicity, the first warning may have come as a deep feeling that something was wrong. An inexplicable unease. A normal day that, for no apparent reason, carried a different weight. A sensation that something was out of place, even though nothing visible had changed. This type of warning does not manifest as an event, but as an internal noise, a subtle yet persistent dissonance. But this, too, was corrected. The mind adjusted, found justifications, and the strangeness was buried under the artificial normality of the world. No matter the form it took, the first warning always came. And it was always followed by a correction, an interference that ensured that, even if something had been seen, the mind would find ways to dismiss it. The real danger was never in the warning itself. The danger was in the way reality immediately adjusted after it, ensuring that nothing was questioned. The forces that arrived first did not destroy the message. They buried it, because they knew that forgetting was a more powerful tool than denial. And so, the first warning was lost. The crack in the simulation was repaired before it could expand. The initial call became nothing more than a distant noise, an irrelevant detail in the flow of time. But the illusion is never perfect. There are always flaws, always gaps. And the only question that remains now is, if the first warning was erased, what happened when the second one came? Unlike the first, which was subtle and easily covered up, the second warning was more direct, more intense, harder to ignore. The system had already corrected the first flaw, but this time the interference came before the message could be fully absorbed. The second warning did not come as a subtle shift in perception. It was an impact, a sudden interference in the timeline, a rupture that could not be ignored so easily. If the first warning was a silent error in the system, the second was a shock. It came to provoke a reaction, to force a pause, to open a breach that could not be immediately closed. And for a moment, it worked. The noise of the illusion diminished, and for the first time, there was enough clarity to realize that something was wrong. This warning may have arrived as a sudden collapse, an unexpected loss, an event that tore through the predictable structure of reality. It was not just any occurrence. It was something that brought deep pain, but at the same time, an unsettling revelation. A moment when everything that once made sense no longer fit. Something inside you knew that it was not just a coincidence. There was a pattern, a message, a connection between events that once seemed isolated. But before you could process this information, interference happened. The shadow arrived faster this time. It did not try to erase the pain. It did not try to convince you that everything was fine. Instead, it sank you even deeper into it. It turned your vulnerability into a labyrinth of doubts and despair. The second warning had the potential to completely destabilize the imposed structure. But instead of allowing this rupture, the forces that arrived first converted the pain into a new kind of prison. Now, the warning was not just muffled. It was used against you. For some, the second warning came as an unexpected betrayal, a break in trust that dismantled all the certainties that once seemed solid. What was safe suddenly revealed itself to be false. What seemed stable crumbled without warning, and for a brief moment, the truth began to emerge. But the shadows did not need to hide this warning. They simply redirected it. They made the mind focus on the pain of loss rather than on what was being revealed through it. And so, the awakening was interrupted once again. Others felt the second warning as a sudden change in how they perceived the world. Something that once seemed normal started to feel uncomfortable. Small details began to draw attention. Reality lost some of its stability. What was once ignored now seemed glaring. But as soon as this awakening began, distraction was activated. The mind was bombarded with new stimuli, urgent problems, unavoidable demands. The strategy here was not to erase the doubt, but to bury it under layers of noise. The second warning was stronger than the first. It was harder to ignore, but it was also more dangerous. because now the opposing forces had learned how to deal with your resistance. They not only corrected the flaw, they anticipated your reaction. They knew you would try to understand. They knew you would feel that something was wrong. And before you could turn that feeling into a real search, they provided false answers, planned distractions, perfectly calculated escapes to divert your gaze. The second warning was a shock, but not a liberation. It was absorbed by the system itself, turned into yet another piece of the structure already built around you. And if the first warning was erased and the second was distorted, then only one question remains. What happened when the third one arrived? The third warning was different. It was not a subtle crack in reality, nor a shock disguised as chaos. It was a moment of direct confrontation, a definitive rupture between what was perceived and what truly existed. No distraction was enough to cover it up. No justification was able to suppress it. It happened, and its force was absolute. If there was a moment when awakening could have happened, it was this one. But just as the warning was definitive, so was the response of the shadows. This warning did not just come to show something. It came to reconnect you with everything that had been lost up to that moment. The shock of the second warning may have been contained, but the energy that had been accumulating could no longer be controlled. And so, the system broke. Reality revealed itself in its rawest form. What was once just a hunch became complete understanding. For an instant, the illusion was destroyed. You saw what you were never meant to see. You knew what you were never meant to know. But the third warning was not received in silence. It triggered a violent reaction. The system would never allow an event of this magnitude to go unanswered. So, the attack began. The chosen one was not simply distracted or convinced to forget. He was crushed. Everything that could be used against him was activated at the same time. Chaos took form. Losses intensified. Pressures multiplied. The shadows were no longer trying to hide the truth. They were trying to destroy him before he could absorb it. For some, the third warning came as a near-death experience, a moment where time ceased to exist, where the body was present, but the consciousness was taken to a place that cannot be explained. For others, it came as an emotional rupture so deep that their identity was irreversibly shaken. It felt as if something had been ripped away, as if part of the mind had been dismantled. But this feeling was not a loss. It was the remnant of a self that never belonged to this prison. The interference was brutal because, this time, there was no longer room for subtleties. The forces that arrived first needed to prevent the truth from taking root in consciousness. So, they did what they always do when subtle manipulation is no longer enough. They destroyed everything that could serve as an anchor for awakening. Relationships, stability, identity, everything that could keep the chosen one grounded was put under attack. And when the world around him became unrecognizable, the only way out seemed to be surrendering to the illusion once again. The third warning was the strongest, but also the most dangerous. Because it did not just reveal the truth, it forced a choice. The choice between enduring the collapse or giving in and returning to dormancy. Many go back. Many accept the fate that was laid out for them, exhausted from the battle. But some resist. Some realize that despite the destruction, something remains. A fragment of knowledge that can no longer be erased. And that is where everything changes. The third warning may have been crushed, but it left something behind. Something that cannot be undone. Something that, no matter how deeply buried, still pulses within you. And now, the question is no longer whether you can wake up. The question is whether you are ready to accept what you have always known. The process was successful. The first warning was erased, the second was distorted, and the third was crushed. But this was not a mere consequence of chance. Someone ensured it would happen this way. The shadows arrived first, before any truth could be absorbed, before any fragment of consciousness could expand. They knew exactly how to act. They did not prevent the warning. They allowed it to happen because they knew they could reverse its effect. They did not need to stop the awakening. They only needed to ensure that it was interpreted as a mistake. These forces operate unseen. They do not announce their presence, do not appear as direct threats. They infiltrate the mind and shape the way reality is perceived. A prison does not need walls if the one inside believes there was never a world beyond. The shadows know that control is not achieved through force, but through conviction. They do not impose a new reality by force. They make the chosen one accept the illusion on his own. And when that happens, they win without having to fight. The world around you has been subtly modified. Small adjustments, small corrections, each made at the exact moment to ensure that any spark of awakening was smothered before it could turn into fire. Time was accelerated, distractions multiplied, noise amplified. The shadows knew that if the chosen one had space to think, there was a risk that something would escape their control. So, everything was done to prevent that from happening. Urgent problems, endless obligations, cycles of repetition ensuring that the mind was always occupied. But the shadows did not just create distractions, they created false convictions. They needed to ensure that if one day the truth tried to emerge again, it would be immediately dismissed. And so, the system was designed to discredit everything that deviated from the established pattern. The chosen one was programmed to laugh at his own intuition, to doubt his own instincts, to reject any idea that challenged the imposed structure. The manipulation became internal. The shadow no longer needed to whisper from the outside. The chosen one's own mind was now doing the job on its own. That is why the chosen one never realized he was deceived. He believed that things had always been this way. The idea of a different path became absurd, irrational, impossible. The prison was completed, but without chains, without visible barriers. Now, the reality around him seemed stable. But this stability was the real trap. The shadows no longer needed to intervene. They had already won. Because as long as the chosen one did not question, as long as he remained trapped within the narrative that was written for him, there was no longer any need for active control. This is the perfection of their plan. The chosen one does not need to be forced to stay in the illusion. He chooses to remain in it himself. He justifies his stagnation. He protects his prison. He convinces himself that there is nothing beyond what he sees. And this is how the shadows ensure that the truth is never recovered. They do not need to hide anything, for they have already taught the chosen one to ignore what is right before his eyes. The most dangerous thing about these forces is not their presence, but their absence. They operate so perfectly that they do not even seem to exist. But there is something they could not erase, something that does not belong to them, a flaw that cannot be corrected, a crack that can never be fully sealed. Within every chosen one, there is a fragment that was not shaped by them, was not created by this system, and cannot be erased by any manipulation. This fragment still pulses, still vibrates, still whispers when everything else is silent. And this is the only mistake the shadows made. They ensured that the Chosen One would not know who he was. But they could not completely erase what had always been inside him. This fragment never dissolved, never was completely erased. It simply waited, because there comes a moment when the illusion is no longer enough to keep him trapped. There comes a moment when the exhaustion of repetition, of the meaningless routine, of the emptiness that is never filled, begins to weigh more than the comfort of the illusion. And when that moment arrives, the shadows face their only true challenge. The Chosen One begins to remember. The shadows always knew that control could not last forever. They never needed absolute dominance, only enough time to make the Chosen One lose himself within the illusion. If they could keep him distracted, occupied with the flow of imposed reality, he would choose not to leave on his own. But there is a limit to how long the truth can be silenced. The repetition of the illusion begins to wear thin, and when that happens, what once seemed unquestionable becomes an evident prison. This realization does not arrive suddenly or as a destructive event. It comes as a subtle flaw in the system, a small detail, yet impossible to ignore, something that does not fit, a gap in the imposed narrative, a moment when the mind perceives that there is something beyond what it has always accepted as real. The shadows notice this crack and go on high alert. If the fissure expands, control may crumble. That is why they must act before the Chosen One understands what is truly happening. Their response is swift and precise. The goal is not to eliminate the doubt, but to suffocate it before it can grow. The shadows increase the pressure, overload the Chosen One's mind, create new problems, accelerate time around him. He feels an inexplicable fatigue, an exhaustion with no clear origin. But it is not the body that is worn out. It is the consciousness, trying to break through the imposed blockade. This invisible weight is not natural. It is the illusion's final defense against the impending collapse. But this time, something is different. Before, the distractions were effective. Now, they are beginning to fail. The Chosen One notices the patterns repeating, sees the recurring traps, and perceives the hidden structure keeping him stagnant. Small details that once went unnoticed now make sense, and hidden connections begin to reveal themselves. The illusion is becoming unstable, and the shadows feel it. They try to reinforce control, but something has already changed. They can no longer hide the inevitable. The fragment of truth within the Chosen One begins to awaken. This core, which could never be completely erased, is now growing and strengthening. No distraction, no fear, no new manipulation can contain it. This is the moment when the game changes. The Chosen One realizes that it is not he who depends on the system, but the system that depends on his acceptance to continue existing. From here on, the shadows can no longer dictate his fate in the same way they once did. And then, the final choice emerges. It is not a question of good or evil, nor of right or wrong. It is a choice between remaining on the safe, predictable, and controlled path, or breaking free from the imposed structure once and for all. But leaving the illusion comes at a price. The shadows will not let the Chosen One go without resistance. Awakening does not come without pain, without challenges, without a final attempt to make him give up. They can no longer force him to stay, but they can hope that fear will paralyze him, that he himself will choose not to move forward. This is the final test, the hardest of all. Now, there are no more excuses, no more distractions to blame, no more barriers to justify inaction. The Chosen One knows what must be done, but knowing is not enough. The courage to act defines those who truly escape from those who merely saw the way out, but hesitated to cross it. The shadows have always counted on this hesitation. But for the few who dare to move forward, there is no turning back. No one will come to save you. No external force will correct what has been done. The warnings have been given. And now, there will be no more. Because this battle was never against something outside of you. It has always been a confrontation between the truth and the conditioned version of who you believed yourself to be. And now, with the entire illusion crumbling, the final choice is in your hands. Now, you know what must be done. Declare it by writing in the comments, "I am aware," to manifest to the universe that the darkness will not reach you first, because now you know how to see the truth. Thank you for being part of this video. If you feel that this journey has only just begun, subscribe to the channel, activate notifications, and continue following the upcoming videos. And if you wish to support this work and strengthen this message, consider helping through Buy Me a Coffee. Your support allows more chosen ones to access these revelations and strengthens this mission to break the illusion. The support link is in the video description. This message has opened a door to more revelations, so click now on the video appearing on the screen and continue this journey. The missing answers are just ahead. Thank you for staying with us until now. Stay strong and see you in the next video. May God bless you.